Before we start, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. I've never talked about this publicly. I guess I always told myself it wasn't my story to tell, but the silence around what happened to Chris and Deshawn is starting to feel heavier than the truth. Whatever that truth even is. My name's Nate Larrabee. I was working dispatch for the Phoenix PD back in 2002, mostly overnight shifts. I wasn't some rookie fresh out of school either. I'd been doing it for 7 years by then. Knew most of the patrol units by voice before they even said their call signs. Chris Doyle and Deshawn Morris were both solid guys, young but steady. You don't always get that combo. The night they vanished, it was just past 2 a.m., midweek, slow as hell. That kind of quiet where you start thinking too much. I remember the call coming in. Just a standard welfare check on a tenant at the old Sandstone Motel off Jefferson. Place had been condemned, technically, but squatters still broke in. Everyone on night patrol hated that address. Too many corners, too much rot. I logged the dispatch, marked the unit assigned, and didn't think twice. Chris radioed in when they got on site. Unit 412, 1023 at Sandstone. Sounded normal, calm, routine. 10 minutes later, both of their cams went dark. At first, I thought maybe it was interference. That motel had always had bad reception, lots of concrete and busted wiring, but then their mic stayed open. I could hear faint static, the occasional shuffle-like movement, but nothing intelligible. I kept calling back. Nothing. Dead air, except for that low crackle. Then suddenly, both radios just stopped. No click-off, no feedback, just silence. It was like they walked into a vacuum. I pinged their last GPS and notified the watch commander. Protocol kicked in fast. Within 30 minutes, we had 4 more units heading that way. They found the cruiser parked at the edge of the lot, engine off, both doors shut. Nothing looked forced. Chris's coffee was still in the holder, steam long gone, but the cup full. Deshawn's jacket was on the back seat, badge still pinned. Their body cams were never recovered, and their handhelds still powered on. One of them was even mid-transmission, like someone had pressed the talk button. But no one was speaking. No signs of struggle. No sign of them. It was like they'd stepped out for a second and just never came back. The search that night went on for hours. Dogs, choppers, every flashlight we had lit up that damn motel like it was the 4th of July. I was still at dispatch, monitoring the airwaves, logging timestamps, trying to keep things straight. But people were getting spooked. One officer, Rodriguez I think, came back pale as a ghost. Said the back hallway on the 2nd floor felt wrong. Like the air was too thick. Like something was watching from just outside his peripheral. He didn't say it out loud, not officially. But I heard him whisper it to his partner when they thought no one else was listening. That place wants to be left alone. The crime scene team went through every room. No blood, no struggle, no prints. Just filth and rot and broken furniture. One room had this massive black stain on the carpet that soaked through the floorboards. But it wasn't blood. The techs tested it 5 different ways. Closest guess was motor oil or mold, but it didn't smell like either. The weirdest part? No usable surveillance footage from any surrounding business. The diner next door, the gas station across the street, they all had cameras pointed toward the motel entrance. But the footage from around 2:15 to 2:45 a.m. was either corrupted or missing altogether, like it had been wiped clean. It said it looked like someone had overwritten the feeds, but there was no evidence of physical tampering. People started whispering theories. Some said cartel stuff, others talked about serial killers, even ghosts. I just wanted answers. The department kept it tight, like they always do when they don't want panic. Press release said ongoing investigation, but internally it was chaos. We had officers refusing to respond to calls near the motel. One even put in for a transfer out of state. And then, nothing. Weeks turned into months. The case went cold. It was like the earth swallowed them whole. I still had their names flagged in my system, like I was hoping one day they'd radio back in 2 years late and ask what took us so long. Then came the envelope. It showed up 5 months later at Internal Affairs. No return address. Just a plain manila envelope, sealed neat. Inside was Chris's police ID, the one he kept in his wallet. It was clean. I mean, weirdly clean. No smudges, no prints, not even from him. Like someone had scrubbed it with alcohol and gloves. There was a single note. I saw it with my own eyes when IA called me in, since I'd been the dispatcher on record that night. It said in perfectly neat block letters, "They asked the wrong questions." That was it. Nothing else. That message, "They asked the wrong questions," ate at me for weeks. I kept replaying that night in my head. Every word from the radio, every gap in static, every gut feeling I ignored. What questions? We'd responded to dozens of welfare checks at condemned buildings. What made this one different? Chris was the kind of guy who noticed little things, stuff others brushed off. Deshaun was sharper than people gave him credit for. Quiet, but sharp. If they saw something they shouldn't have, I can only guess it was inside that motel. Maybe someone was using it for something else. Something that required erasing them from the picture. That's the theory I landed on. Because the alternative? That something supernatural swallowed them up? That's the part I try not to think about. After that envelope, everything just stopped. No more evidence, no more leads. The department quietly archived the case. Both families got payouts from the city and a wall of silence in return. I tried to keep in touch with Chris's sister for a while, but she moved to Oregon. Said she couldn't live in a place where her brother's name was only mentioned in whispers. I don't blame her. As for me, I transferred out of dispatch a year later. Couldn't sit at that desk anymore, staring at the empty login IDs that still showed active for 2 guys no one had seen since. About a year ago, I drove past the Sandstone Motel. It's finally been torn down, leveled to dirt. But I swear, as I passed the spot where their cruiser had been parked that night, I felt it again. That wrongness, like a vibration just under the surface of your skin, like your instincts are yelling to turn around but your brain hasn't caught up yet. I didn't stop, I didn't even slow down, just kept driving until the feeling let go of me. Whatever happened to them, I think that place was part of it. Or maybe it was something hiding inside it. Either way, they were right to be afraid. To this day, every time I hear static on the radio, just a little crackle between stations, I freeze for half a second. Part of me still thinks I'll hear one of their voices cut in, confused and tired, asking if anyone's out there. And if that day ever comes, I don't even know what I'll say back. I was with the West Virginia State Police back in the mid-90s, stationed near Summersville. It was mostly quiet work, lots of back roads, small-town disputes, maybe a drunk driver on the weekends. I'd been on the force for about 6 years at the time, still young enough to enjoy the night shifts and the long stretches of silence between radio calls. This happened in the fall of '94. I remember because the leaves were just turning, and the days had that kind of stillness you only get in the mountains before winter. That night, I was scheduled for patrol along Route 19, a long rural stretch that cuts through miles of forest and forgotten towns. It was just past 11 p.m. when the call came in about a possible stolen sedan headed northbound near Birch River. A gray '88 Oldsmobile, plates reported missing out of Charleston. I was about 10 miles south of there and figured I'd try to intercept. I remember the roads were nearly empty. Just me, the hum of the engine, and static on the radio. When I finally spotted the car, it was cruising well under the speed limit. No erratic movements, nothing suspicious except it matched the description to the letter. I tailed it quietly for maybe a mile before hitting the lights. It didn't run, just slowed down, pulled over near a wide shoulder that edged into the woods. Easy. Too easy, maybe. I radioed in the stop and gave dispatch the plate number. The dashboard camera was running like always. We had just started using those bulky VHS-based models back then. I approached on foot, flashlight in my left, hand near my holster. Inside, I could see a figure in the driver's seat, just one. Couldn't make out details. The windows were tinted and slightly fogged from the inside, which was odd given the temperature that night. As I got closer, I felt something strange, like the air had thickened. Not cold, not warm, just off. I can't really explain it. My boots crunched over the gravel, but it sounded distant somehow, like I was underwater. And then, this part still makes my skin crawl. I blinked and the car was empty, no sound, no movement, door shut, engine idling, just empty. I stepped up to the driver's side and looked in. Nothing. No one in the back either. I circled around, opened the door slowly, expecting maybe someone had ducked down or slid across the seat. Nothing. The keys were still in the ignition, headlights on, radio dead. I remember my throat going dry, and I instinctively reached for my radio, but all I got was a high-pitched whine like the mic was jammed. I stepped back, tried the passenger side, popped the trunk. Again, nothing. Just an old stained floor mat and the smell of burnt rubber. I went back to the cruiser to call it in manually, but even the car radio was dead. Just static and bursts of interference like someone was jamming the signal. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The silence. Not just the kind you get late at night on a highway, but a complete absence of sound. No wind, no bugs, no engine noise. It was like the world had been muted. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just listening to the dead air, waiting for something, anything, to break it. Eventually, the radio crackled back to life on its own, like nothing had happened. I reported the vehicle as abandoned and requested backup, though I didn't know what the hell I was even describing. I didn't mention that I'd seen someone in the car seconds before they vanished. By the time another unit arrived, the Oldsmobile was already gone. I swear on my badge. I turned away for less than a minute, looked back, and it was no longer there. No engine noise, no lights, just gone. We checked for tire tracks, but the gravel made it hard to tell. It looked like the car had never been there. My dashcam footage should have caught everything, but when we reviewed it later, it froze at the exact moment I reached the rear of the car. The frame just locked there. No sound, no movement, until the tape cut off. We sent it to the techs in Charleston, but they said the footage was corrupted in a way they hadn't seen before, like it had been intentionally wiped or scrambled. The next morning, a local hunter named Dale Caldwell called in something odd. He said he'd been out near Gauley Mountain before sunrise and spotted a patrol car, one of ours, idling just off a game trail deep in the woods. He said the headlights were on, and it looked like someone was in the driver's seat, but when he got closer, the car just wasn't there anymore. Vanished, like it had been a mirage. He swore he wasn't drunk or tired, said he'd gotten a good look at the markings on the car. It was one of ours, no doubt. We followed his directions, and sure enough, there were tire tracks leading into the tree line, but they circled in a wide loop and stopped dead in the middle of a clearing. No exit trail. No sign of movement. It was like the cruiser had been lifted off the ground. At that point, command started getting real nervous. They pulled the dashcam unit from my car and told me to take a few days off. Unofficially, I was being watched like I might have made the whole thing up, but I know what I saw. And more than that, what I felt. That night didn't feel like a bad call or a weird glitch. It felt like I had stepped into something I wasn't supposed to. I started having trouble sleeping after that. I'd wake up thinking I heard a radio squelch or tires on gravel outside my window. But when I checked, there was nothing. Just that same cold, still air from the night it all happened. A week later, they found the stolen Oldsmobile abandoned on a dirt road about 10 miles from the original stop. It was parked perfectly, like someone had just stepped out to stretch their legs and vanished. The weirdest part? It was spotless. I mean, wiped down to the bone. No prints, no dirt in the wheel wells, no hair, no dust, nothing. Even the plates were clean, almost like it had come straight from a showroom. They towed it in and ran every kind of test we had back then, but it gave us nothing. It was a dead end, and when I say that car was clean, I don't mean just physically. It felt sterile, like it didn't belong out there, like it never had. I talked to Dale again a few days later. He said he went back to that clearing and found something he hadn't noticed before. A circle of dead pine needles, perfectly round, about 10 feet wide, right where the tire tracks had stopped. He said the center smelled like ozone and old pennies. I drove out there on my own that night against better judgment just to see it, and it was real. That ring was there. The smell, too. I didn't step inside it. I don't know why, but something in my gut told me not to. It was like standing on the edge of a place that didn't want you. That didn't care if you came back. After that, I asked to be reassigned. Got moved to desk work out in Clarksburg. I never filed a full report, not the real one anyway. The official paperwork just says, suspect fled scene. Dash cam malfunction. Vehicle later recovered. I guess that's technically true. But what happened on that road didn't feel like anything human. And it didn't feel like something I was supposed to be part of. I kept thinking about the moment I blinked, and that car went empty. Like I had stepped over an invisible line. Like whatever had been in that car knew I was coming, and waited until I was close enough to feel it leave. It's been over 30 years now, and I still don't have an answer. I've read some things online, similar cases, weird disappearances, cars found abandoned without reason. Most people chalk it up to stress or imagination. But when you felt it, that cut in the world, that moment where everything around you stops making sense, you know it's real. You know you were close to something that doesn't want to be seen, and maybe doesn't want you to leave. I never went back to that part of Route 19. Still won't drive it even today. Every once in a while, when I'm flipping through the radio, I swear I catch a bit of that same static, just for a second. Then it's gone. Not sure why I'm finally deciding to share this, but something about turning 40 last month made me realize I've been carrying this way too long. I used to be a cop in Baltimore, worked mostly in records and internal documentation. Paper pusher, if we're being honest. It was 2018 and I'd been recently transferred from administrative to evidence audit. My job was to help digitize old logs, clean up old paper trails, box up stuff no one had looked at in decades. It was boring, quiet, safer than patrol. I took the gig thinking I'd coast through to retirement without much fuss. But what I found that spring changed how I looked at the badge. And some nights, I still don't sleep. The evidence room I was working in was buried in the lower level of a building on Pratt Street. A narrow, windowless space they nicknamed the Crypt. It smelled like damp cardboard and old ink. Some of the boxes dated back to the 80s, held together by yellowed tape and faded handwriting. I was assigned to comb through files from 91 to 95, making sure everything was scanned properly and still in place. Most of it was routine: bagged clothing, dusty Polaroids, cassette tapes with peeling labels. But on March 12th, I opened a box labeled Case 93047A Maria Lopez. Except what I found inside didn't match the victim's name. The contents were a rape kit, swabs, slides, clothing samples. But the report attached listed a different woman entirely: Janice Freeman. I'd seen her name before. That case had been closed in '93. According to records, it was dismissed after insufficient evidence and failure to cooperate. Thing is, Janice was listed as the suspect in this file, not the victim. And that kit? It hadn't even been tested despite being sealed and marked with a lab reference number that never appeared in the system. At first, I thought it was a clerical mistake. Someone shuffled papers, mixed boxes, whatever. But the further I looked, the worse it got. I ran the box number through the digital archive to check chain of custody. That's when I noticed something else. The case file for 93047A had been edited that same morning. A timestamp showed it had been accessed and altered at 7:14 a.m., a few hours before I even clocked in. No one had requested it. No access badge was recorded. I checked with IT, thinking maybe it was an automatic update or an error on the log, but they told me there was no record of anyone accessing that file. The last official access was in 2004. That's when I felt it, that crawling chill in my stomach. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just paperwork. I spent the rest of that day buried in old inventory sheets, trying to cross-reference anything that looked out of place. By mid-afternoon, I had flagged 6 more rape kits from the early 90s, all either misfiled, mislabeled, or tagged under completely unrelated cases. Some had no victim name. Others had been marked as evidence destroyed, even though the physical kits were still sitting there, untouched. The oddest part? Every single one was linked, directly or loosely, to officers who were either retired, deceased, or quietly reassigned out of state. I wrote everything down in my audit log and brought it to my supervisor, Carla. She told me, without even reading it, to hold off on escalating and to leave the kits where I found them. That's when the pit in my stomach started turning into something sharper. The next morning, I got to my desk around 6:45 a.m. I was always one of the first in. But something was off. My chair was slightly pulled back. The drawer where I kept my badge and notebook was ajar. And sitting right in the center of my keyboard was a folded piece of printer paper, no envelope. Just a single sentence, typed in bold black letters. Let the past stay buried. No name, no signature, no date. I didn't touch it. Just stared at it for a long time, like it might vanish if I blinked hard enough. When I finally showed it to Carla, she said it was probably some dumb prank, and that I was letting the files get to me. She tossed the note in the shred bin without even raising an eyebrow. I remember feeling like I'd swallowed a rock. That paper felt more real than anything I'd logged in weeks. That afternoon, the access to the evidence room was restricted. My keycard stopped working at the lower level. When I asked Carla, she said the review had been paused and we were being reassigned to a new unit digitizing parking citations. Just like that. No explanation. I asked if this was related to the rape kit mismatches. She said nothing. Just kept typing like I hadn't spoken. That silence, that intentional silence, scared me more than the damn note. I went home early that day, paranoid that someone was following me in the parking garage. I even took 3 different routes home, checking my mirrors like I was suddenly in some bad movie. But that night was the breaking point. Around 10 p.m., I was sitting on the couch flipping channels when I heard my front doorknob rattle. Not knock, not jiggle. Rattle. Like someone was trying to turn it quietly, like they didn't want to be noticed. I froze. I live alone. No roommates. No guests. The porch light was on, but when I crept to the peephole, no one was there. Just my empty front steps. I stood there holding my breath until my chest hurt. Then I saw it. A dark figure just at the edge of my lawn, standing under the streetlight. Still. Too still, like they were waiting for something. I blinked once and they were gone. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house, every distant car door, sounded like someone creeping back up my steps. The next morning I tried to report what had happened. The note, the door, the figure outside. But internal affairs barely let me finish. The officer I spoke with, some guy named Reynolds, jotted down a few lines and then cut me off with a polite but firm, "We'll look into it." That was the last I heard from them. No follow-up, no incident report, nothing. A week later, when I called back, they claimed they had no record of my complaint. I checked the official log myself. My statement was gone. Just scrubbed. I wanted to dig deeper, but every door I knocked on seemed to close before I even got there. I contacted the lab that supposedly handled the evidence kits. They said they'd never received half the IDs I gave them. I tried reaching out to the families of the original victims, but most had moved, disconnected their numbers, or passed away. One woman, I won't name her here, answered and immediately hung up when I told her who I was. Another caller ID I traced back to the widow of one of the implicated officers. She answered just long enough to whisper, "Don't call here again," before the line went dead. It was like trying to pull a thread from a sweater that someone had already burned. In May of that year, I resigned. Officially, it was personal reasons. Unofficially, I just couldn't take the feeling that every time I walked into that building, I was being watched. Not in the obvious way, not security cameras or coworkers, but in that bone-deep way where your instincts start whispering, "Get out." And maybe I was scared of what I'd find if I kept going. Maybe part of me realized that the people who buried those cases knew exactly what they were doing, that they had help. That whatever was buried down there wasn't just old paperwork, it was intentional. I've kept copies of everything I could, scans, screenshots, even photos of the mismatched kits before they sealed the room. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. Some nights I still think about sending it to a journalist or an independent watchdog, but then I remember that note, the one on my keyboard, and the look in Carla's eyes when she told me to drop it. It wasn't apathy. It was fear. Real, cold fear, like she'd already seen what happened to people who didn't let the past stay buried. I've moved since then. Different state, different job. But sometimes, when I take the trash out late at night or walk to my car before dawn, I feel it again, that heavy stillness, like someone's watching, like someone remembers. I'm not really the kind of guy who posts stuff online, especially not something like this, but lately I've felt like I need to talk about it somewhere. Maybe someone else out there has gone through something similar. I've been with the NYPD for nearly 11 years now. I'm not a rookie. I don't scare easily, and I've seen more than my share of weird shit. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever messed with my head the way this did. It happened last fall, when the night started getting colder and the department was dealing with a bunch of unrelated calls that, in hindsight, maybe weren't so unrelated. I was assigned to the 105th Precinct in Queens at the time, working mostly day shifts so I could be home with my son in the evenings. The first time I heard about the black SUV was during a morning briefing. One of the guys, Officer Medina, mentioned that dispatch had logged 4 separate calls in just a few days. All about the same vehicle, same description, a matte black SUV, tinted windows, no visible damage, and always circling the same few blocks in Springfield Gardens. All 4 callers described the same license plate, down to the digit. But here's the thing. The plate they gave came back as impounded. Vehicle towed and locked up in a storage lot in Brooklyn. That didn't sit right with any of us, but we figured maybe it was a stolen plate or someone copying an old one. It happens. That would have been the end of it, except more calls started coming in. A lot more. Different people, different neighborhoods, always the same vehicle. One elderly guy even claimed the driver slowed down when he made eye contact and smiled at him, but said he couldn't see the man's face, just the shape of a head in the shadowed driver's seat. We pulled traffic cam footage from a couple of streets where people swore the SUV had driven through. Nothing. Like literally nothing. It was as if the car didn't exist, but that's impossible. I mean, how do 5 different people describe the same car with the same plate in the same area, and it just doesn't show up? It started to feel like a joke, like maybe someone was screwing with us, but then something happened that made it personal. One night, I was pulling into my driveway around 8:30, just after grabbing dinner for me and my kid. My street's quiet, real suburban, with those low amber streetlights that make everything look dim and kind of unreal at night. I noticed a vehicle parked about 2 houses down from mine. Black SUV, tinted windows, engine off, but you could see the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat. I froze. My kid, Noah, was still in the back seat of my car, and I just had this feeling like I was being watched. I didn't go inside right away. I stood there staring at that SUV, and it didn't move. Didn't even flinch, just sat there. I called it in right away, just to be safe. I didn't want to make a scene in front of my kid, so I got Noah inside and told him to start his homework while I stepped back out. Within a few minutes, my buddy Chris from the precinct pulled up in his cruiser. By that time, the SUV was gone, just vanished. No sound, no lights, no sign it had even moved. Chris did a sweep around the block, but there was nothing to follow. We checked my doorbell cam, and here's the kicker. It caught me pulling into the driveway, caught Chris's cruiser arriving, but nothing between those moments. No SUV, not even the sound of a car leaving. It was like the street glitched for 10 minutes. The next few nights were quiet, but something had changed. I started noticing little things. Unlocked gates, a faint smell of engine grease near my back door, Noah's bedroom window left open even though I knew I'd shut it. I chalked it up to stress, to being overworked and maybe a little paranoid, but that only lasted a few days. Because then Medina came into work looking like hell, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled like he hadn't slept. He told us someone had been parked outside his apartment the night before, and when he stepped out with his flashlight, it was that same SUV, same plate. Except this time, he said, when he walked toward it, the headlights flicked on and it reversed down the entire block without making a sound. Try picturing that. Reverse lights on, tires turning, but no sound of an engine, no crunching gravel. Just motion, like a film played backward on mute. It was around that point we started digging deeper. A couple guys from tech pulled every available traffic cam shot they could from the neighborhoods where the sightings had happened. Dozens of cameras, different angles, nothing. Not a single frame with the SUV in it. One of the guys even joked that it was like the thing was made of smoke or only visible to the naked eye. But no one laughed. Not really. Because a week later, Officer Terrence Fields, who hadn't even been involved in the original calls, reported someone watching his daughter's school from across the street. The school's security guard said the vehicle had been parked there at least 2 hours. Same SUV. And again, no footage of it leaving. Just gone. That's when I started to feel the shift in the air, like this wasn't just a weird car. This was something else. Something playing with us. Because that Friday I got home to find a manila envelope on my porch. No name, no address. Inside, a printed photo of me and Noah, taken from behind a window. It was our living room. The angle was from inside the house, looking out at us on the couch. I still don't know how they got in. Nothing was broken, nothing was stolen. But after that, I started sleeping in short bursts with my service weapon on the nightstand and every curtain drawn. I tried going through official channels after that, but no one wanted to touch it. I brought the photo to my lieutenant, explained everything, SUV sightings, license plate, the envelope on my porch. And all I got was a half-hearted, "We'll look into it." It felt like no one wanted to be associated with the case anymore. Like the more we pushed, the more it pushed back. Chris, the guy who first responded to my call that night, told me off the record that someone from Internal Affairs had asked him if we'd been drinking on duty the night of the incident. I couldn't believe it. We were being gaslit by our own department. Medina even told me he'd gotten a call from an unknown number saying, "Let it go, officer. You're not supposed to see it." That shook him up bad. He transferred out of Queens the next week. The final straw came 2 days later. I was coming home after my shift and saw my front door open just a crack. Noah was supposed to be at his friend's house until dinner, so I knew he wasn't home yet. I drew my weapon and went in slow, every step creaking under me like the house itself didn't want me there. Nothing looked touched. Kitchen, bathroom, bedrooms, all just as I left them. But when I walked into Noah's room, I saw muddy footprints on the carpet. They didn't lead in or out, just a pair of prints near the center of the room, and taped to his closet door was a new photo. This time, it was just me, asleep in bed. Same grainy texture, same low light, like it was taken at 3 a.m. from the foot of the mattress. I took Noah and checked us into a hotel that night, no hesitation. I didn't even pack. I just grabbed our IDs, my badge, and my gun. I told the front desk not to put our names on the register, paid in cash, and sat in the room all night staring at the window. I didn't sleep. I didn't let Noah out of my sight. He kept asking if someone had broken in, and I just told him the lock was broken, but I think he knew better. He's not dumb. He's seen me calm through gunshots and car chases, and that night I couldn't stop pacing. I was terrified, not of whoever was out there, but of the feeling that we were being monitored, studied. Like someone was recording reactions, not just watching. And then, just like that, it stopped. The SUV stopped showing up. No more calls. No more envelopes. It was like someone flipped a switch and shut it all down. I went back home after 3 nights at the hotel and found everything untouched. Even the muddy prints in Noah's room were gone, like they'd never been there. I still don't know what it was, or what it wanted. None of us do. Medina never answered my calls after he moved, and Chris won't even talk about it anymore. I've checked that impound record a dozen times. Same license plate, same SUV, still locked in that Brooklyn lot. And yet, I saw it. We all did. So how the hell does a car that's been parked for a year watch you sleep from your driveway? I ended up filing an unofficial report just for my own sanity, stashed it in a locked drawer at home. It has copies of the photos, a timeline of the calls, even a list of the officers who mentioned seeing the SUV. Sometimes I think about turning it into something more, sending it to a journalist or one of those fringe podcasts that dig into unsolved weirdness. But then I remember the voice on the phone telling Medina to let it go. I don't want that call. I've got a kid, a life, and if whatever that thing was wanted to mess with us, it could have done a lot worse. So maybe it got what it came for. Maybe we passed whatever test we were part of. What keeps me up, though, isn't the fear anymore. It's the question I can't shake. Why cops? Why our families? And why impersonate a car that doesn't exist? Every so often, I'll find myself glancing out the window when the house is quiet. Not because I think I'll see it, but because a small part of me wants to. Just so I'll know it wasn't all in my head, but it never shows up. Not anymore. Whatever it was, it's gone. For now. Back in 2016, I was working as a digital evidence analyst for the LAPD. My name's Emily Carter, and I'd been with the department for 7 years at that point. Most of my work was tedious but predictable, reviewing security footage, parsing timestamps, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. I lived alone in a small apartment off Sunset, nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom unit with creaky pipes and 2 thin walls. It wasn't the best part of LA, but I liked the anonymity. I kept to myself, didn't host many people, and usually brought work home because the quiet helped me focus. At the time, I was handling a string of break-ins in a strip of residential buildings near downtown. Nothing too dramatic, just some stolen electronics and forced entries. But the pattern was weird. Every victim lived within 3 blocks of each other. That's what raised the red flag. One night I brought home a hard drive containing raw CCTV pulls from the alleyways and parking structures near the latest burglary scene. I had a system for this. I'd throw on some tea, set the footage to play on my second monitor, and scrub through with a notepad in hand. But about 20 minutes into it, I noticed something I couldn't explain. One of the folders labeled Cam 23 Park North didn't show the exterior of the complex like the others. Instead, it showed the inside of someone's apartment, specifically a small kitchen with a fridge covered in magnetic poetry and a blinking router in the corner. The camera angle was wide, almost like it had been installed in the ceiling. The timestamp matched the night of the reported break-in. I thought maybe someone mislabeled a file, or a tenant had their own camera and submitted it. But there was no accompanying report or mention of private surveillance. And yet, there it was. Thinking it might be an isolated mistake, I dug deeper. Another file, Cam 26 Garage, looked like it should have been from the garage entrance. Instead, it showed a dimly lit bedroom, unmade bed, a floor lamp in the corner. No one was inside. Just silence, and a faint hum from the AC unit. What rattled me was that I recognized the lamp. Not exactly, just the kind. That particular model was sold at a local home goods store I'd been to a dozen times. It was cheap, forgettable, but specific. When I cross-referenced the victims of reported break-ins with the file names, my stomach dropped. Every clip seemed to correspond to someone who'd had their apartment burglarized in the last 6 months. And the footage wasn't from hallway cams or entry points. It was all from inside the apartments. No consent, no paperwork, nothing in the system. I contacted our IT division the next morning and asked for a trace on the footage origin. I framed it as a possible misfiling issue, didn't want to raise alarms without more proof. A guy named Marcus from Systems ran a metadata scan on the hard drive. I remember the pause in his voice when he said, "There's nothing. No record of these being pulled, logged, or even existing on our network before now." I thought maybe the footage came from private security systems that weren't properly documented, but none of the residents had mentioned that in their reports. And the weirdest part? The files were clean. No signs of tampering, no corruption. Just eerie, perfectly intact footage from places we had no reason or right to be watching. I couldn't let it go. That same night, I took the drive home again, this time more obsessed than cautious. I started opening every folder, Cam 27, Cam 28, Cam 29, like peeling layers off something rotten underneath. Each one was another apartment, another unsuspecting resident. Most were empty when recorded, but some weren't. One showed a man sitting on his couch, flipping through a newspaper, completely unaware of the small black dot blinking faintly behind his bookshelf. Another showed a woman brushing her hair in the mirror, seen through an angle that could only exist if a camera had been installed behind her medicine cabinet. My skin crawled. These weren't smart cams. This wasn't Nest or Ring. The feed quality was too clean, too smooth, and the angles were too perfectly chosen to be amateur setups. I knew surveillance. This was deliberate. I kept a notebook by my side, logging everything. Time codes, decor I could match to case files, facial recognition hits, anything that could give me a lead. But around 1:30 a.m. I found something that made my breath catch. A file buried under a mislabeled folder, Cam 34 dump, showed my apartment, my living room. Same sagging couch, same coffee stain on the armrest. The clip was from 3 days earlier. It was daytime, and I was gone. I had worked a double shift that day. But there it was. The camera caught the entire apartment from a high corner near the ceiling fan. I never installed a camera. I never even bought one. And the scariest part? The footage zoomed in slightly whenever someone walked past the couch, as if someone was controlling it manually. I froze. Then I stood up, looking around my own living room like I'd just walked into someone else's house. Every creak in the walls felt louder. I checked behind the vent, in the smoke detector, even under the table. Nothing. No wires, no lenses. Just drywall and dust. I pulled up the building's maintenance records the next day using my department login. The system showed a software update run by building management about a month prior. But when I clicked to view the logs, they were gone. Not just deleted, scrubbed. Like someone went in with admin access and erased everything clean. I called the building office. The front desk lady, Shannon, told me they had just updated their database and couldn't recover past logs. She sounded sincere but also confused, like she didn't really understand what I was asking. At this point, I was too deep to back out. I stopped bringing the hard drive to the department. Instead, I made encrypted copies and kept them on a USB hidden in my coat lining. I started walking different routes home, checking over my shoulder, even sleeping in my car some nights. Not because I thought someone was following me, because I knew someone had already been inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had set this system up wasn't just watching residents. They were watching people who reported something. People like me. I started going through the break-in victims again, looking for a pattern. That's when I realized every single one of them had filed a report that mentioned something weird, something that didn't make sense. Misplaced objects, windows that were locked but found open, pets acting strange, subtle things, easy to dismiss. But now I saw it differently. One woman, Jennifer Hill, had mentioned in her statement that her cat stopped sleeping in the bedroom and would hiss at the corner of the room every night. Another guy, Theo Morales, said he woke up one morning and found all his silverware arranged in perfect rows on the kitchen floor. No signs of forced entry. And now that I thought about it, I'd had my own odd moment a few weeks earlier. I came home to find my door double locked from the inside. I assumed I'd forgotten, maybe locked the bottom and the deadbolt without thinking, but that wasn't possible. You can't lock it like that unless you're inside. I'd laughed it off. I didn't laugh anymore. I filed an internal request to dig into the software updates performed in buildings connected to the reported burglaries. I masked it as a digital infrastructure audit to avoid drawing attention. The few records that weren't erased all pointed to the same third-party contractor, Delos SecureTech, a firm supposedly specializing in remote access maintenance. But they weren't listed in our vendor database. Their website was a single page with a broken contact form. No address, no support line. When I searched them in government systems, nothing came up, not even a tax ID. It was like they didn't exist. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a few hacked apartments. Someone had installed surveillance systems on purpose, under the guise of maintenance. And the police had no official record of it. The scariest part? I stopped getting alerts on my internal requests. Normally, even if something gets rejected, you get a system notification. I got nothing. My access to certain folders was revoked. My emails to Marcus in IT bounced back. When I called, the number was disconnected. I went by his office. Cleaned out. No forwarding address. I asked around, and someone said he'd put in a transfer request weeks ago, except I had just talked to him days earlier. That's when I pulled the plug. I unplugged everything in my apartment, Wi-Fi, smart TV, even the microwave, and left town for a few days, stayed in a motel under a fake name. I needed space to breathe, to think. I still don't know who was behind it, but after I came back, my apartment was different. Not visibly, but I could feel it, like someone had reset the space. My plants were watered, which I never asked for. The rug I had kicked up near the door was laid flat. I checked every inch again. No hidden cams, no bugs. I installed my own signal detector, paid for with cash. Nothing came up. A week later, all the strange folders disappeared from my backup drives. One by one, like they were never there. And the original hard drive, it overheated and died the same night. I hadn't even plugged it in. I ended up transferring out of digital evidence review within the month. I never filed an official report. I didn't trust the system enough to. But I left a burner drive in a safe deposit box just in case. It has some of the screen captures and file names. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to remind myself I'm not crazy. To this day, I still check the corners of every room I walk into, and I haven't lived in an apartment since. I'm Detective Ethan Rowe, Chicago PD, assigned to District 12. This happened 2 years ago in late spring, May, I think, but the chill from that week still sticks to my skin. Back then I was 38, clean record, 12 years on the force, married, 2 kids, and a solid reputation in the precinct. I wasn't some beat cop just coasting. I was one of the guys who actually sat in the internal meetings when we approved the precinct's pilot use of facial recognition software. That detail haunts me now. It started off simple, matching footage from corner stores and traffic cams to repeat offenders. Nothing intrusive, nothing scary. But we didn't realize how fast that simple tech could turn on us. The first time it happened to me, I was in the break room pouring stale coffee when my captain walked in, red-faced, holding a tablet. He didn't say anything at first, just handed it over. On screen was a still image from a liquor store robbery. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m., 3 nights prior. The suspect, caught mid-stride, had my face. Not someone who looked like me. My face. Same mole under the jaw, same jacket I'd lost months ago. Even a little scar over the eyebrow that I got in college. I laughed at first. "That's AI glitching," I said. "Right? Everyone knows these systems aren't perfect." But he wasn't laughing. And that's when I noticed something else. He wasn't asking. He was telling me to come into his office. That wasn't protocol for a joke. That day blurred into a series of rooms, IA, legal, some suit from the tech department. I must have told them 10 times I was at home that night, and I had the Nest Cam footage to prove it. Still, the AI flagged me. Highly confident match, the report said. I wasn't the only one either. Another guy from patrol, Marcus Doyle, got pinged on an unrelated case. Same situation. Video footage, blurred, but the system matched him with 94% certainty to a mugging downtown. He was in Wisconsin with his wife that weekend, visiting her parents. At first, we all joked about it. Marcus even called himself the AI bandit. But that stopped when he got put on administrative leave while his case was reviewed. I stayed quiet after that. The next incident knocked the air out of the precinct. Officer Laura Henley, a solid, no-nonsense type who'd been with us for over 15 years, was flagged in 4 separate cases within 1 week. All different locations, different times, different suspects, but the same result. Her face, distorted in low res, showing up in footage from ATM cameras in convenience stores. Internal Affairs didn't have a choice. They pulled her badge and gun. But here's the thing. I'd spoken to Laura just hours before one of the robberies supposedly happened. We were both in the precinct finishing paperwork. I know she didn't do it. Everyone knew. But the system didn't care. It said what it said, and suddenly that was enough. Things spiraled fast. Within 2 weeks, 6 more officers were flagged. All of them had alibis, some backed by GPS logs, witness accounts, even city-issued dashcam footage showing they were miles away from the crime scenes. But the system kept insisting otherwise. What made it worse was the quiet shift in how our superiors started reacting. At first, they were on our side, defensive, skeptical. But then, after a memo from HQ, they started talking like lawyers. Words like pattern of misconduct and emerging behavioral flags started slipping into conversations. One by one, officers started getting reassigned to desk duty, pending inquiry. Nobody said it out loud, but the vibe was clear. We were being buried. I started digging, not officially, just for my own sanity. I logged into the internal portal where case footage was stored, hoping to compare the flagged videos with our old system's archives. That's when I noticed something deeply wrong. The videos where I was supposedly caught, they didn't just show my face. They had audio now, scratchy clips of someone shouting during the robbery. But the voice wasn't mine. It was off, too flat, too mechanical. And the more I played it back, the more I realized it was a voice clone. I'd heard about those online, but never thought I'd hear one mimicking me in an evidence file. When I tried to export the file for backup, the screen glitched and kicked me out of the system. I wasn't supposed to see that. I went to a guy I trusted, Paul Yates, a tech who worked back-end support before the precinct outsourced everything. I told him I thought the footage was being altered. He looked at me like I was nuts at first, but when I showed him a few clips I'd managed to screen record on my phone, his face drained of color. He recognized the metadata structure. It wasn't standard issue. It came from a third-party patch he said he'd warned the department about 6 months earlier. They pushed a silent update through a vendor nobody ever vetted, he told me. Said it was just a security patch. He pulled up a list of access logs from the last month and spotted a dozen weird entries. Activity under officer IDs of people who weren't even on duty those days. It was like someone was building fake timelines. Only we couldn't tell who. That night, Paul tried tracing the vendor's server location from the install file. He looked spooked. The trail bounced through 4 countries before hitting a dead end in a data farm in Ohio, registered to a shell company with no real employees, no physical office. The next morning, he didn't show up to work. I called his phone 6 times, straight to voicemail. A day later, his apartment was cleaned out. No sign of him, no forwarding address. The cops chalked it up to him quitting suddenly, but I knew better. I've seen people disappear before, but not like that. Not someone mid-investigation. Whatever we were digging into, it didn't want to be found. I started keeping copies of everything, photos, voice clips, timestamp anomalies. On a flash drive I didn't even trust leaving in my apartment. I'd leave it in the glove compartment of my wife's car, under the lining, switching vehicles every couple of days. That's how paranoid I got. The deeper I looked, the more I noticed strange overlaps. Multiple flagged officers all showing up at crime scenes where body cam footage mysteriously failed to upload. Reports that were filed and then silently edited days later. One guy, Officer Nguyen, swore he never even entered a building where a robbery took place. 2 weeks later, a digital signature of his radio pinged inside that exact building, only it was a copy-paste log entry. Whoever was behind this wasn't just setting us up. They were rewriting our movements like editing a Google Doc. The final straw for me came when a civilian complaint showed up in my file. A woman claimed I shoved her during a traffic stop. That would have been routine, except the stop never happened. There was dashcam footage showing her car pulling over, but instead of me, it showed someone in uniform who looked like me from the side. My badge number was read out over dispatch, but I'd been at home with my son that night, helping him build a volcano for school. I called my captain, desperate, and told him to check dispatch records. I begged him. And that's when he told me I was being placed on unpaid leave, pending an official misconduct review. "It's out of my hands, Ethan," he said. "The system's confident." Confident. Like that meant anything anymore. I took what I had to the press. Not the big stations, they wouldn't touch it. But a smaller independent paper agreed to meet. I gave them everything. A week later, the story dropped. Chicago PD's facial recognition software is framing its own officers. But by then, the vendor had already gone dark. Their website gone. Their LinkedIn wiped. Even the LLC registered to their address showed as dissolved. The city issued a vague statement about pausing the use of AI in active investigations, and quietly rolled back the program. Internal Affairs launched a full audit, but nothing came of it publicly. No arrests, no trace of who altered the system. Most of us never got our records cleared. We were just unassigned indefinitely. To this day, I don't know what the real goal was, if it was sabotage, a test, or something worse. But I still carry that drive with me. Not for leverage, not even for justice, just so I know I'm not crazy. I've since left the force and now teach criminology at a community college outside Milwaukee. But I never touch smart cameras. I don't use biometric locks. And every now and then, I get this weird email ping. No sender, no subject, just a black box emoji. Happens once every few months. I delete it instantly. But yeah, that's why I don't trust smart anything anymore. Not when I've seen what confident systems are willing to erase to protect themselves. I'm not really the kind of guy who posts on forums like this, but something happened a few years ago that I've never been able to fully explain. And lately, I can't stop thinking about it. My name's Derek Morgan. Back in 2018, I was working the night shift with the St. Louis PD. I'd been on the force about 8 years by then, married, 2 kids, nothing unusual. I wasn't some burnout or rookie. I liked the job. It had structure. Night shifts weren't ideal for family life, but I managed. That summer, though, things started getting weird. Not just for me, for everyone on our shift. And for the first time in my career, I started getting scared of the people wearing the same badge as me. I remember the first time I noticed something off was with my partner, Vince Morales. He was one of those guys who always stayed sharp, never drank more than 1 beer, worked out religiously, read case law for fun. But around mid-July, I started noticing little changes. He'd forget stuff. Small things at first, misplacing his cuffs, forgetting the code to unlock the cruiser gate. Then it got stranger. One night he drove through a red light at a busy intersection without even blinking. When I called him out, he just smiled and said, "Did I?" That look in his eye, it was like nobody was home behind it. Cold, flat. I laughed it off, but something about it stayed with me. Over the next week or two, it wasn't just Vince. Everyone on night patrol was showing signs. Johnson, who used to hum old blues songs under his breath every night, went dead silent. Maria Tran, who never broke protocol in 5 years, charged into a bar fight without backup. Our lieutenant started mixing up names and forgetting what calls he'd assigned. A few of us joked about night brain, blaming it on bad sleep or the heat wave. But it wasn't just fatigue. It felt like a layer of something had settled over everyone, like this collective fog. People were quicker to anger, slower to respond. I even saw one officer laugh when a guy pulled a knife on him. That wasn't bravery. That was something else. By early August, my own sleep was wrecked. I'd lie awake until 4 or 5 in the morning, even after long shifts, with this weird ringing in my ears. Not loud, more like a low, vibrating hum. Almost like a dull heartbeat inside my skull. I couldn't focus. I forgot to pick up my daughter from daycare one afternoon, and didn't realize until I saw my wife's text 2 hours later. That had never happened before. I started keeping a notebook to write down basic stuff: groceries, appointments, which nights I was on call. One night I wrote something down in the dark, and when I looked at it the next morning, I couldn't read it. It wasn't sloppy. It was gibberish. Like my brain knew the letters but didn't know how they fit together anymore. Around that same time, a few of the officers' spouses started raising concerns. One guy, Mark Holloway, had his wife show up at the precinct in tears because he'd come home at 3 a.m. and just stood in their kitchen for an hour staring at the microwave. Didn't speak, didn't move. She thought he was having a stroke, but the ER doc said he was fine, just disoriented. Another partner told me she caught her husband watching their baby monitor with the sound off, over and over, like he was waiting for something to happen. A few of them, myself included, started to feel disconnected, like emotionally flat. I remember my son scraped his knee in the driveway and came running up to me crying, and I just stood there, not cold, not panicked, just blank. I didn't even hug him. Then came the memo. It wasn't official at first, just a printed page slipped under a door at the station. No sender, no stamp, just a simple line at the top. Internal notice, St. Louis Dept of Health, unverified findings. It mentioned possible side effects linked to prolonged exposure to the new body cams we'd started using that year, part of a federal tech grant. Most of us thought the upgrade was a good thing at first. The devices were sleeker, lighter, and supposedly had built-in environmental sensors for officer safety. But according to that document, the cameras emitted low-frequency pulses at night, something about adaptive infrared cycling. I didn't fully get the science, but the memo mentioned mild neural inflammation observed in several night officers during routine checkups. That was enough to make my stomach drop. What really got me was the mention of emotional blunting and memory disruption. I hadn't told anyone about the stuff I was going through. The mental fog, the detachment, the scrambled writing. But reading those words felt like someone had been inside my head. I brought it up to Vince the next night, and he just stared at me and said, "You too?" That was when I realized this wasn't stress. It wasn't lack of sleep. Something was doing this to us. The memo said testing was still ongoing, and that the city had no current plans to halt deployment. I felt sick. Like we were rats in some experiment nobody told us about. That night, I made the decision to stop wearing the body cam altogether. I clipped the harness on like usual, but left the device in my locker. No one noticed. We were too deep in our own heads at that point. That shift, for the first time in weeks, I felt present. Not 100%, but better. More alert. I could taste my coffee again. I remembered to lock the cruiser. I even cracked a joke during dispatch and actually meant it. It sounds small, but after what we'd all been going through, it felt like climbing out of a hole I didn't know I'd fallen into. Over the next few nights, I quietly told a few of the others what I'd done, ditching the cam, and suggested they try the same. Most of them looked at me like I was crazy, but 3 guys did it, and all 3 reported the same thing. The ringing stopped, their sleep got better, and they started feeling like themselves again. We kept it quiet. There was this unspoken fear that if the department found out, we'd get reprimanded or worse. It wasn't just about breaking protocol. It was the sinking realization that they knew. Someone up the chain had to know what these things were doing to us, and still chose to keep them strapped to our chests night after night. Then, about 2 weeks after I stopped using mine, a new memo came down, official this time. It said the body cams would be temporarily pulled for a firmware update. No explanation, no admission of fault. Just a polite note saying we'd go without them for a few shifts while technical adjustments were made. But we noticed something strange. The night after the cams were pulled, almost everyone showed up early. Nobody looked half dead anymore. Conversations came back. People were joking again. Maria Tran brought donuts for the first time in a month. I swear, the entire station felt like it had been snapped back into place. Like we'd all woken up from some fog we didn't know we were in. But not everyone came back from it the same. Vince? He got pulled from patrol entirely. Something in his evaluation flagged a persistent detachment response, whatever that means. Holloway ended up quitting the force, said he didn't feel safe being around people anymore. Me? I stayed a few more months, but it wasn't the same. Every time I passed the tech room or saw one of those little black devices being charged, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I started dreaming about red lights blinking in the dark. Dreams where my own voice would repeat things I hadn't said. I eventually transferred to a community liaison role. Less stress, no night shifts, and, most importantly, no cams. I never got a full explanation. Nobody from the city or the feds ever came clean about what exactly those pulses were doing to our brains, or why no one stopped it sooner. But I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And if you ask me today whether I think it was just bad tech or something more deliberate, I honestly don't know what scares me more.